Since the night my father died, I've worn the skin of a victim. But that's only the perfect disguise. I infiltrated the heart of the pack as an invisible servant, waiting for the exact moment to destroy the alpha who ruined everything. He looks at me and thinks I'm just another conquest, a secret flame he's determined to possess. But he doesn't realize the weapon aimed at his chest is me. I got close to make him fall. Desire was always my strategy. But the heat that's burning between us was never part of the plan. The touch that should weaken him is breaking me instead. I'm supposed to hate him. I'm supposed to want him gone. But now I'm trapped in a hunger that devours reason. And the kill date is almost here. When the fire finally ignites, who will survive the flames? The air in the lower warren felt thicker than usual, heavy with the stench of damp stone and the palpable anticipation of the pack above. Tonight was the Blood Moon Summit. Tonight was the end of a decade of agonizing sacrifice. I smoothed the rough fabric of my Omega uniform, the gesture purely automatic. It was the only thing I had left of my former life. This hatred, this rigid discipline. For 10 years, since October 12th, 2013, the night of the Blackwood Massacre, I had worn the mask of servitude, dedicating every breath to the moment I would finally plunge the silver shiv into the heart of the alpha who took everything from me. I, Willow Hayes, 24, wasn't vulnerable prey. I was the hunter. My fingers brushed against the small, cool weight concealed beneath my apron. The silver shiv, personalized, purified, and ready. It was the only thing standing between me and the crushing weight of Arthur Hayes' memory. My father died believing I would avenge him, but vengeance had become complicated. The reason I was granted such proximity to the Alpha's inner sanctum, the very heart of Blackwood Keep, lay on a simple chain around my neck, the thorn sigil, a distinctive heavy silver ring Caden had given me, supposedly marking me as his personal hidden jewel. A beautiful conquest, he thought. The calculated seduction had worked too well. I remembered the searing heat of his hand on my hip, the possessive claim in his amber eyes. Caden Thorne, 31, was everything the legends described. Tall, powerfully built, dominant, and utterly intoxicating. He believed he was merely indulging a whim, lowering his guard slightly for the pretty Omega with the fierce, hidden emerald eyes. But every touch, every whispered promise that felt disturbingly real, was just another calculated step closer to his demise. I stood now, waiting for the final signal. I had just hours. A sudden, sharp knock at the heavy oak door of my sparse quarters ripped me from my focus. It was Sterling Vance, 55, Caden's outwardly loyal beta and advisor. His rugged appearance and watchful gray eyes usually held a veneer of benign concern, but tonight they were colder, sharper. "Willow," he murmured, his voice a low rasp, checking the hallway quickly. "The Alpha awaits your service in the western wing before the assembly. Remember your duties. Tonight is critical for the pack's morale." I offered a slight subservient bow. The perfect little Omega. "Understood, Beta Sterling." "Good." Sterling's lips pulled into a thin, unsettling smile, the kind that never reached his eyes. "You have performed remarkably well. You have secured the path." I nodded, the implication clear. I had secured Caden's trust, sealing his fate. He disappeared into the shadows of the lower warren, leaving me trembling, but not from fear. From the pure, unadulterated proximity to my objective. I secured the silver shiv, adjusted the lie I wore like a second skin, and started the long climb from the functional, hidden servant housing toward the Gothic sprawl of Blackwood Keep. As I moved through the empty corridors of the western wing, I sought a moment of solitude, a final review of the plan. I ducked into Sterling's auxiliary office, a small space he used for late-night paperwork. It was a stupid risk, but I needed to ground myself. My eyes scanned the desk, looking for nothing in particular, when a flicker of leather caught my attention, behind a stack of census reports. It was a heavy, aged book, bound in scarred cowhide, the confessional ledger. The name itself felt like a punch to the gut. This was not a standard pack ledger. Curiosity warred with the urgency of my mission. My father's execution, the absolute certainty of Caden's guilt, had been my life's blood. But the intense bond I had formed with Caden, the confusing protectiveness he sometimes showed, had seeded doubt I had violently suppressed until this moment. I wrenched the book open, my hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped the silver shiv. The script inside was tight, meticulous, and horrifyingly familiar. Sterling Vance's elegant, precise handwriting. I began to read, scanning dates and transaction codes, expecting proof of Caden's wicked orchestrations. Instead, what leaped off the page was a chilling, detailed record of manipulated timelines, falsified evidence, and clandestine meetings with rival packs. October 12th, 2013, the date of the massacre. My vision blurred as I focused on that entry. It was an account of the assault on my family's old lands. The ledger didn't describe Caden giving the order. It described Sterling Vance giving the order, then meticulously framing the incident to ensure Caden was implicated while Sterling maintained his position as the grieving, loyal advisor. The Alpha must never know the depth of my ambition. Hayes' pack had intelligence I required. His death secures the silence, and the perceived guilt of Caden Thorne secures my future. Sterling Vance, the shrewd, manipulative figure who had just minutes ago confirmed my final strike, was the true architect of the Blackwood Massacre. Caden had been the convenient, powerful scapegoat. The dominant wolf I planned to destroy was, in truth, the intended target of Sterling's long-game manipulation, just as I was. The weight of the silver shiv in my hand suddenly felt unbearable. My singular, brutal objective was a catastrophic mistake. I had devoted 10 years of my life to hunting the wrong wolf. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Caden's devastating, undeniable intensity hadn't been a weakness I exploited. It had been genuine. His protection wasn't a calculated move. It was simply who he was. The clock was ticking. The Blood Moon Summit was already beginning at the Obsidian Clearing, the ancient ritual site reserved for the most serious pact declarations, or executions. My weapon was ready. I was expected to arrive and execute the monster who killed my father, but the monster was Sterling. I slammed the confessional ledger shut, tucked it securely under my uniform, and burst from the office. I ran through Blackwood Keep, the disguise of the subservient Omega shattering as I raced toward the Obsidian Clearing. I arrived at the clearing, breathless. Hundreds of pack members were gathered, their faces uplifted toward the colossal, blood-orange moon hanging low in the sky. Caden Thorne stood center stage, powerful and imposing, his voice ringing out over the silent crowd, discussing the future stability of the pack. Sterling Vance stood dutifully at his side, a picture of unquestionable loyalty. My presence on the raised earth drew immediate attention. I was supposed to be hiding in the shadows. Caden's amber eyes found mine. They were full of concern, then surprise, then a devastating flash of understanding. He saw the panic, the conflict, and the deadly glint of the purified silver I now held openly. The silver shiv was drawn. The pack gasped. Caden tensed, bracing for the inevitable strike. He believed I was the vengeful prey-turned killer. Willow. Caden's command was a thunderclap. I took a step forward, not toward Caden, but shifting my trajectory sharply. My eyes locked onto Sterling Vance. Sterling's facade finally cracked. His gray eyes widened in true horror. He hadn't expected the revelation. Not now, not ever. He thought he had complete control. Traitor, Sterling roared, recognizing the shift in my intent and drawing a concealed sidearm, a gesture far too quick and non-alpha for a beta. Caden, still positioned for defense against me, reacted instantly to the beta's aggression. Sterling, what are you doing? Caden demanded, moving to intercept his advisor. She is compromised, Alpha. She is a threat. She attempts to slander your name. Sterling shrieked, aiming his weapon not at me, but strategically at Caden, using the chaos as cover. The air exploded in motion. I moved like the hunter I was, fueled not by vengeance, but by a desperate, agonizing need to protect the man I realized, in this heart-stopping moment, I loved. I threw myself between the two men, not to stab Caden, but to intercept Sterling. The silver shiv, meant for Caden's heart, was buried deep into Sterling Vance's torso. Sterling gasped, the sidearm clattering harmlessly to the ground. He looked down at the blade, my father's vengeance, now consecrated by the blood of the true villain. You chose him? Sterling choked out, the betrayal etched on his face. He was never the monster, I whispered, pulling the dagger free. You were. I threw the confessional ledger onto the ground near Caden's feet. The truth is exposed. Sterling Vance collapsed, his reign of manipulation ending not by an Alpha's command, but by the hand of the Omega servant he thought was his pawn. Silence descended upon the obsidian clearing, broken only by the rasp of my breathing. I stood over the body of the man who had destroyed my family, holding the dagger that represented 10 years of misguided rage. Caden stood frozen, staring at me, then at Sterling, then at the ledger at his boots. He hadn't touched me. He hadn't moved to defend himself against my initial perceived attack. His protection had always been focused outward. His amber eyes, usually so arrogant, were now flooded with a dawning, terrible understanding of my decade-long pain and the horrifying, impossible choice I had just made. He knelt slowly, retrieving the ledger. As he read the entry detailing his own unwitting involvement in the framing, a single, devastating word escaped his lips. Willow. I dropped the bloodied silver shiv. It landed with a soft thud on the dirt, the sound marking the final death of my mission and the violent birth of a terrifying new reality. My heart, once guided purely by rage, now navigated the overwhelming pull of the raw, desperate bond between us. I had abandoned my sacred duty of vengeance, not because I was weak, but because I had found a truth greater than my hatred. Caden stood up, leaving the ledger behind. He didn't rush. He walked the few feet toward me, his powerful form enveloping mine. He didn't ask for explanations. He didn't demand loyalty. He simply reached out, his big hands cupping my face, tracing the sharp angle of my jaw. "You saved me," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "I tried to kill you," I confessed, the words burning my throat. "And now you are free," he countered, looking into my emerald eyes, recognizing the hunter beneath the Omega uniform, recognizing the agonizing love that had defied logic and malice. "The hunt is over, Willow." I leaned into his touch, the adrenaline fading, leaving behind only the undeniable heat of our connection. The war was done. The impossible choice had been made. The hunter had claimed her true prize, a love born in deception, secured by painful truth, and consecrated beneath the light of the blood moon. I was no longer the prey, and he was no longer the mark. We were simply two wolves, finally free from the shadows of a deceitful past. The silence that followed Sterling's collapse was a living entity, vast and absolute, swallowing the murmurs of the stunned pack gathered under the ominous glow of the blood moon summit. The air in the obsidian clearing was thick with the scent of pine, earth, and the coppery tang of fresh blood. My lungs burned. My arms ached from the violent, desperate thrust. I stared down at the traitor, Sterling Vance, whose wide, dead-gray eyes reflected the blood-orange hue of the moon, a fitting witness to the death of his ambition. The weight of 10 years, the disguise, the lies, the consuming bitter hatred, lifted from me in a single agonizing heave. It left me hollow, yet terrifyingly real. I was no longer the meticulously crafted instrument of vengeance. I was simply Willow, standing in the aftermath of a massacre I had been trained to commit, only to save the intended victim. Caden remained knelt near Sterling's body, the confessional ledger open in his hands. He was motionless, his powerful frame momentarily stripped of its alpha dominance by the sheer magnitude of the betrayal laid bare. He didn't just read the words. He devoured the meticulously recorded deceit that had shaped his life and mine. He read the truth of October 12th, 2013, the cold calculation behind the destruction of my father and our pack, and the decade-long manipulation designed to ensure Caden's eventual fall. A low, guttural sound tore from Caden's chest, not a roar of rage, but a sound of profound, wounded comprehension. The arrogance that usually defined him was gone, replaced by a terrible vulnerability. He lifted his head, his amber eyes searing into mine, filled with disbelief, accusation, and ultimately, a dawning, shattering clarity. He saw the silver shiv lying uselessly in the dirt between us, and then he looked at the crimson stain spreading across Sterling's uniform. He looked at the face of the Omega he thought he was claiming as a secret conquest, and finally understood the lethal depth of the waters he'd waded into. He stood slowly, the leather-bound ledger slipping from his grasp to join the dagger in the dust. Every pack member watched, rigid with confusion and fear, unable to reconcile the image of their loyal beta, assassinated by the seemingly meek Omega. Caden took one deliberate step toward me. He ignored the terrified faces, the murmurs, and the scent of death. His entire focus was a magnetic, dangerous pull toward my conflict. "It was all a lie," he murmured, his voice a broken rasp. "Everything he built, everything I believed. He thought I was the prey," I whispered, the words catching in my throat, my vision blurring with unshed tears. "A vulnerable Omega. He sent me to secure your demise. He thought the hatred would ensure the kill. And you were the hunter," Caden finished for me, his expression softening marginally, recognizing the cold, relentless drive that had sustained me for so long. "You've been hunting me since your father's death." "Yes," I confirmed, shame and fierce pride warring within me. "I came here to kill you, Caden. My only purpose was to bury this purified silver in your heart, to avenge Arthur Hayes. I waited for the judgment, the raw alpha fury, the demand for my immediate execution. But it never came. He didn't move to restrain me. He didn't even seem angry at my original intent. He seemed agonizingly, overwhelmingly focused on the impossible choice I had just made. He closed the distance entirely, his height towering over my petite frame. He didn't touch me with his hands yet, but the sheer intensity of his presence was a physical force, wrapping around me like a protective, suffocating cloak. "When you threw yourself in front of me," Caden said, his gaze dropping momentarily to the blood on my hands, "you saved the man you believed killed your family." "Why, Willow?" The silence stretched, immense and agonizing. The truth was simple, yet utterly devastating to admit. The strategic maneuver of calculated seduction had morphed into something raw, potent, and irreversible. "Because the lie broke," I admitted, my voice trembling. Somewhere between the calculated touches and the stolen moments, I saw beyond the monster I was trained to hate. I saw the man Sterling was trying to destroy. I realized the bond, the intensity, wasn't a weakness I exploited. It was real. And in that moment, Caden, when Sterling raised his weapon, the mission didn't matter. Only you mattered. It was a confession that cost me every ounce of my resolve, every shred of the rigid discipline that had been my armor. I had chosen love over duty, connection over vengeance. My father's memory, once a beacon of burning rage, now seemed to urge me forward, away from darkness, and toward the uncertain light of this man's protection. Caden finally reached out, his big hands cupping my face with infinite gentleness, brushing the hair back from my emerald eyes. His thumb swept across my cheekbone, tracing a path that felt less like a conquest and more like a profound act of devotion. "You risked everything," he stated, his voice barely a breath. "Your life, your mission, your decade of sacrifice. You turned the weapon meant for me against the real threat. That is not the act of a slave, or a conquest, or a mere Omega. That is the act of a true alpha, a hunter with honor." His words validated the unbearable conflict that had been tearing me apart. He didn't see the Omega servant. He saw Willow Hayes, the fierce, resolute woman who had sought justice and found a terrible, necessary truth. He looked down at the thorn sigil, the silver ring hanging around my neck, the symbol of his hidden jewel. It was meant to be the mark of his oblivious ownership. Now it felt like a covenant. Caden gently lifted the chain, his fingertips resting on the cold metal. "This ring was meant to bind you to me in secret. It was the first step in my selfish claim." He looked back into my eyes, and the possessive gleam returned, but it was tempered by respect, by a deep, undeniable love born from mutual danger. "Now, it marks the woman who saved the pack, who saved me." He pulled me against his chest, the raw, intoxicating scent of his dominance washing over me, grounding me in the reality of the obsidian clearing. His heart hammered a wild rhythm against my ear. It was the deepest form of communication, a testament to the fact that his guard was utterly, irretrievably down. The hundreds of eyes watching us finally faded into irrelevance. The only world was the tight, heated space between Caden and me. "The hunt is over," Caden repeated, his lips brushing my temple. "You don't have to run, Willow. You don't have to pretend. You are free." But freedom was terrifying. Freedom meant facing the depth of my feelings for the man I had meticulously plotted to destroy. It meant realizing that the ultimate villain was now vanquished, and the future was uncharted, illuminated only by the powerful, agonizing pull of the raw bond between us. I clutched his uniform, the rough fabric digging into my fingers. "I don't know how to stop hunting," I admitted, the confession laced with residual fear. Caden pulled back just enough to look at my eyes. His gaze was fierce, loving, and utterly certain. "Then hunt with me," he commanded, his voice regaining some of its alpha resonance. "Hunt for truth. Hunt for our future. We will rebuild the stability Sterling tried to shatter. Together." He gently took my bloodied hand and kissed the knuckles, a silent promise witnessed by the ancient ritual grounds and the blood-soaked earth. "I tried to deny this," I murmured, leaning into his strength. "I fought it with every breath." "So did I, in my own way," Caden admitted, a flash of vulnerability crossing his face. "I tried to rationalize my desire, to compartmentalize you as just a beautiful conquest, because the true intensity of our connection was terrifying. It threatened my control. I never thought I would find my mate in the shadows of my own deceitful beta." He lifted his head, turning slightly toward the assembled pack, who watched in stunned silence, awaiting their alpha's directive. Caden didn't address the death. He addressed the future, and his claim was absolute. "Sterling Vance was a viper in the heart of Blackwood Keep," Caden announced, his voice regaining its true, thunderous authority, echoing across the clearing. "He orchestrated the massacre 10 years ago, and framed me. This woman," he gestured to me, drawing me closer still, "was sent here for vengeance, driven by a righteous cause. But she found the truth and chose honor over hatred, and loyalty over blood." He looked back at me, his eyes burning with amber light. The blood moon seemed to cast its blessing over us, sealing the impossible choice I had made. The rage that had guided my life had been extinguished, replaced by a devastating, explosive love I couldn't deny. I was no longer the subservient Omega, the vulnerable prey, or the vengeful hunter. I was Willow, standing beside the man I loved, consecrated by fire and truth. The past was brutal, but the future, however uncertain, was ours. We were two wolves, standing together, ready to face the dawn. The hunt was over, and the bond, forbidden and fiercely earned, had finally claimed its victory. Caden Thorne, the dominant wolf who thought he was merely claiming a hidden jewel, was saved by the hunter he never saw coming, and in saving him, she had saved herself. The declaration Caden made hung heavy in the Blood Moon Summit air. It was a formal decree of war's end and a startling pronouncement of allegiance. He was not just clearing his name, he was elevating me, the Omega servant, to a position of unassailable honor before his entire pack. The silence that followed his words finally splintered. It wasn't the sound of immediate acceptance, but rather a chaotic chorus of stunned, disbelieving murmurs. These wolves had followed Sterling's whispered counsel for a decade, trusting his facade of loyalty. Now, they were forced to reconcile the brutal sight of their trusted beta dead on the ground with the undeniable alpha authority Caden was projecting. My heart still thrummed a frantic, almost painful rhythm against my ribs. I felt the profound vulnerability of my new status, exposed, yet utterly protected by the arms wrapped around me. Caden, sensing the pack's fracture, tightened his hold, then released me just enough to project his gaze over the hundreds of eyes fixed on us. His eyes, usually sharp with calculation, were now burning with a singular, resolute focus that demanded obedience. "The ledger," Caden commanded, his voice shaking the pine needles on the ground. "It contains the truth, a decade of deception. Take it, read it. Let the clarity banish the fog Sterling Vance wove around Blackwood." A trusted lieutenant, a stocky beta named Reese, approached hesitantly and retrieved the leather-bound book from the dirt. As Reese began to turn the crisp pages, Caden's attention snapped back to me, the vast crowd momentarily fading. "The silver shiv," he murmured, his gaze falling to the small, deadly dagger I had carried for 10 years, my constant, agonizing reminder of my singular purpose. I bent stiffly, my joints protesting the sudden rush of adrenaline and fatigue. My fingers closed around the cold hilt, the metal slick with a mix of pine sap and the enemy's blood. It felt like an extension of my own skeletal structure, yet suddenly alien, a tool I no longer needed, a tether to the darkness I had just escaped. Caden gently took the shiv from my hand. He didn't inspect it or condemn it. He merely regarded it as a broken promise, a history that had to be laid to rest. Without hesitation, he tossed the purified silver dagger deep into the surrounding dense woods. It disappeared with a soft thud among the roots and leaves, signifying the final, definitive end of the hunt. "It is done, Willow," he reiterated, his touch grounding me. The vengeance is satisfied, not through death, but through truth. You are no longer defined by what you intended to destroy, but by what you chose to save. The sheer scope of his forgiveness, his acceptance of my murderous intent, was staggering. He didn't see me as a threat averted. He saw me as a crucial piece of himself recovered. We stood there for a long moment, the scent of death mingling with the rising tension of Caden's pack, as they began to circulate the devastating contents of the confessional ledger. Disbelief morphed into sickening realization, then into a collective burning rage against the corpse lying at our feet. "We go back to the keep," Caden stated, his hand finding the small of my back, guiding me with a possessive strength that felt utterly natural. "Sterling's memory will be erased, his actions condemned. Blackwood must be cleansed of his poison." The procession back through the woods was unlike anything I had ever experienced. For years I had walked those paths silently, skirting the edges, disappearing into the shadows of the lower warren upon command. Now, I walked at the Alpha's side, sharing his stride, my bloodied hand still cradled gently in his grip. The wolves who had once seen me only as a nameless, subservient Omega servant now lowered their eyes, or stared with a mixture of fear and newfound respect. I didn't return to the sparse, functional quarters of the lower warren. That life, the carefully constructed prison of my disguise, was shattered forever. Caden led me directly to the heart of Blackwood Keep, his private, commanding suite. The rooms were vast, furnished in heavy dark oak and rich leather, a stark contrast to the rough stone and thin blankets that had been my reality for so long. As the heavy oak door shut behind us, locking away the world of chaos and confrontation, the adrenaline finally crashed. My legs felt weak, and the weight of the last hour settled upon my shoulders like stone. Caden turned, his amber eyes intense, searching mine for lingering fear or regret. He seemed to realize that while the physical danger was past, the emotional battle in my core was just beginning. "Come," he said, his voice dropping from the alpha command tone to a deep, intimate plea. He led me to a luxurious chaise lounge near a roaring fireplace. He knelt before me, not as the dominant alpha asserting control, but as a man seeking connection. He reached for the bloodied cloth of my simple servant uniform, the garment that had been my invisible shield. "Let me take this burden from you," he whispered. With careful hands, he helped me shed the soiled clothing. The physical act was tender, devoid of the calculated seduction that had once defined our proximity. It was purely an act of care, acknowledging the warrior beneath the guise of the Omega. When I was finally stripped down to a soft undershift, Caden leaned back on his heels, his gaze sweeping over my petite frame. His eyes paused on the lingering scars, not visible wounds, but the subtle, sharp lines left by years of self-denial and hardened resolve. "Look at me, Willow," he urged. My emerald eyes met his. The reflection I saw in his gaze was no longer the vulnerable prey, nor the relentless hunter. It was simply us. "Tell me what you feel now," Caden pressed, taking my clean hands in his. "The rage is gone. The mission is complete. What is left?" I swallowed hard, the confession I had made in the clearing expanding and taking root in the safety of his space. "The devastating, undeniable intensity," I whispered, using the words I had once feared. "It's overwhelming. I spent so long cultivating hatred for the man I thought you were, Caden. When I realized the truth, the depth of the bond I was trying to exploit, it stopped being a strategy. It became the only honest thing in my life." He nodded slowly, understanding flowing between us like an electric current. "I knew the moment you threw yourself in front of that knife that you weren't just a conquest. You were my destruction, or my salvation. You chose salvation." He stood and lifted me into his arms, carrying me toward his massive bed. This time the movement wasn't about power or lust. It was about integration, about forging the two warring halves of our identities into one unbreakable unit. He laid me down and followed, his powerful build settling beside me. He didn't rush to touch me physically, but instead focused on the symbol that had marked the beginning of our dangerous game. Caden lifted the thorn sigil, the silver ring still dangling from the chain around my neck. The soft light of the fire glinted off the intricate engraving. "This was meant to be my secret mark of ownership," Caden said, his voice raspy, "the way I claimed the hidden jewel without the pack knowing." He paused, then slowly, carefully, he unhooked the chain from around my neck, freeing me from the literal weight of my former role. You are not owned, Willow. You are claimed by choice, by battle, by honor. He looked at the ring, then back at me, a decision solidifying in his striking amber eyes. Instead of putting the ring away, he slipped it onto the fourth finger of my left hand. It was slightly loose, meant for his larger thumb, but the gesture was monumental. "Let this be seen by everyone," Caden commanded, his eyes shining with possessiveness that was now freely given and mutually accepted. "Let them know the hunter is now the Alpha's partner, the one who brought the truth and saved this pack from collapse." The weight of the silver on my finger felt simultaneously foreign and perfectly right. It wasn't the badge of a hidden conquest. It was the mark of a powerful, agonizing love. I reached up and cupped his sharp jawline, pulling him down until our foreheads rested together. "Sterling was right about one thing," I murmured, a faint, lingering bitterness twisting the edge of the memory. "He thought I was the perfect weapon, driven by grief, trained in deceit, but he underestimated the fire you ignited in me. He thought the hatred would ensure the kill, but he never accounted for the intensity of the bond that would inevitably burn it all away." "A big mistake," Caden finished, his lips ghosting over mine. "He thought you were the prey, but you taught us all that the prey can become the fiercest hunter." This was the end of the line. The final confrontation had stripped away the lies, the hatred, and the rigid discipline of my mission. The agony of my impossible choice was justified. I had devoted 10 years to hunting the wrong wolf, but in the final, brutal moment, I had chosen the only path that honored my father's memory, the path toward truth and light, found unexpectedly in the heart of the man I was supposed to destroy. Caden kissed me then, not a calculated, stolen moment, but a fierce, foundational kiss that erased the blood, the betrayal, and the decade of pain. It was a covenant, a promise of a future forged in fire. As the blood moon faded outside the windows of Blackwood Keep, giving way to the slow, certain promise of dawn, I knew my heart was home. The hunt was truly over. Willow Hayes, the Omega assassin, had found her true place, not as a shadow seeking vengeance, but as the light beside her Alpha, ready to face the world they had just redeemed. If this story burned through you like the blood moon, drop a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next hunt.